Hello and welcome everyone to our latest Future Foods webinar. I'm Rod Howells. I run the Future Foods programme, which is a collaboration between Aberystwyth and BIC Innovation. On our panel today, we've got Louise Nielsen, who is heading up NutriWales, which is sponsored by Welsh Government to help create clusters of companies looking at particular areas of interest from an R&D base. So if there's areas where you're looking to get support around R&D issues, then NutriWales is a good place to start. We've also got Natalie Rouse, who's on the panel, who works closely with myself through Future Foods, and Natalie's going to be running through the presentation today on the insight. For those who are joining, welcome. We're recording the session today, so there'll be a copy available afterwards. There'll also be a copy of the slides. If you'd like to introduce yourselves by putting a very short sentence into the chat function, that would be great. Make sure it's for all attendees so that everyone can see it. I think the default's for the panel. Also, as we go through, we'll do the presentation and then we will answer questions at the end. So I'll be keeping an eye on the chat box and we'll sweep up the questions at that part at the end of the session. So feel free as things come through to drop questions in there. I think that's everything. So let's move on to the presentation. If you would like to share the screen.
Good morning and welcome to our insights on CBD. So we're looking to explore anything or all applications that can be associated with it. So as Rod just mentioned, we're working with the Future Foods, and I'm going to come on a little bit later as well to all the different collaborations that we could take place within CBD, and we'll talk about that a little bit further in a moment as well. So let's get straight into the market. So it's kind of quite a diverse world. Only over the couple of last few years has it been something that's grown significantly, and it's really looking to kind of come up to about 26 billion by 2025, which is huge. So it was only kind of really beginning to take on market traction about 2017. So it's been a huge growth. So looking purely into the UK, we're looking at about 300 million of annual sales of CBD products have been bought, sold or purchased, which is absolutely huge. And there seems to be a growing market for these people as well. Things got in the way there. So we're looking at about 6 million people that have tried CBD, and this was from a YouGov survey from 2019. So if we're looking at it as a kind of snowballing of people that are really interested in it, it is certainly growing. It does span anything from food, nutraceutical and pharmaceutical, and especially since the medicinal cannabis that has been coming on, which we're not talking about here, but that really has also kind of stemmed the growth as well. The US does dominate, but Europe is closely kind of following. So if we're looking into the market, it's the North American market, as I just said, that really is kind of dominating it and does have the largest growing areas as well. But Europe and the UK seem to be one of the second kind of growing, absolutely huge amount of different applications and huge amount of interest that is with it as well. Again, following from when the medicinal cannabis license has come in, again, purely for people that are under prescription, it has really stemmed a lot of interest as well, and also given people real reason to believe that it does have therapeutic properties and that it could be something that they could use within their life. It does seem to be heavily concentrated with major players, so it does seem to be dominated by, again, mainly kind of US companies that they're looking into it and doing a lot of research within it. And we're looking at about, there's usually, the main players which are looking into it is the health benefits. So that seems to be the major driver of why people are going to buy it. It's a little bit as well due to people kind of feeling that it's a little bit naughty. It's been a little bit off limits for so many years, but now people are wanting to get their hands on something that perhaps they've been missing out on. So just to kind of confirm here, so there's the different types of oil that we're looking at, and it is CBD that we're focusing on and looking to kind of gain interest in. So hemp oil is from the seeds, and that's sort of as the hemp hemp grows. You then extract the seeds and it's cold pressed oil. And this you can buy in many health foods and also kind of say Tesco's, supermarkets, anywhere. And that is really, really high in omega-3 fatty acids. So hemp oil itself is a very nutritious oil that you can apply to salads. You wouldn't heat because again, it's quite unstable at high temperatures. But CBD oil is the one that we're really focusing on, and that's on the leaves, stems and stalks. And again, solvent extraction or CO2 extraction methods. And then you've got that into the oil that you can then start applying either as a topical solution, sublingual into your buccal cavity, or you could just be putting it into foods and drinks as we're going to explore a little bit. And then obviously the cannabis oil, which I have mentioned, but again, is kind of striking a lot of clinical research, but again, not the area that we're focusing on. So looking at market trends, you know, when you think of CBD, it really does tick a lot of the trends and consumer markets at the moment. It's functional. It has a lot of associations to what it's going to do within the body. Plant-based, obviously vegan, environmental, and it's very, very sustainable. The hemp plant grows very quickly. And it's also used then for textiles, paper. Interestingly, I think it was in 1533 when Henry VIII made it compulsory that all farmers must grow hemp because they were seeing such a need of having rope. So again, as a textile, it's absolutely superb. So really nothing of that plant is going to go to waste. Full of natural goodness or associated natural goodness. Again, there's still more research really to be there. And it's being put into a lot more convenience products. So it can be as simple as putting a few drops under the tongue, or it could be that it's popped into snack bars. YouGov did some interesting surveys going back to the end of summer last year. And they were looking at kind of particularly UK and Britain's of where they were looking and who would be interested to use such product. And I think it's still quite interesting. We hear a lot about CBD, but the market is still a little bit apprehensive. So there are people that are certainly wanting to jump into it, and it does seem to be the under 25s. You have to be over 18 in order to purchase or in order to sell CBD to a customer, hence why it's 18 and above. And as we kind of go up the age ranges, there is more skepticism as you're kind of getting a little bit older, but certainly still quite a wide market that's still open to it. You know, 20% of the 65 plus still interested in it, and it's attributed factors. So within the human body, it's been associated with so many positive health benefits with CBD. So we're looking at anything reducing artery risk, anti-inflammatory, and we're looking actually at bone density, relieving pain and relieving anxiety. And it really shows that 51% of consumers are buying CBD really for the anxiety reducing and aiding sleep. And we know that increased sleep has such a multitude of health halo benefits. It's also kind of looking at various other cannabinoid systems within the body. So you've got various different receptors, and CBD can then bind onto those receptors, which at present your body does make its own kind of cannabinoid system. And with those, they're made out of omega-6 fatty acids. So the regulations are quite, well, they're all there, but they can be quite woolly to kind of really dissect. So in the UK, it does seem kind of more straightforward than places like the US, because from the US, it's state to state, there is very, very differences. So at least in the UK, everything is uniform. But you must have, or must be growing or using 10 of the legal strains, and that will be going down to 9 as of 2021. So if you're growing hemp or if you're using the hemp oil, you must make sure that it's coming from one of those legal strains. You cannot make any medical claims. So when you're putting a label onto your packet, it still must follow all the other nutritional labels, but you must make sure that it doesn't have any medicinal claim. You must make sure how much of the CBD content is in there, and that must be stated on there as well. You also should put down the serving size and also how it is to be used, whether it's a dropper, whether you're eating, for instance, it's in a food form, how much of that food that you should be eating. In 2019, it was made a novel food, so that was great. So kind of made sure that they were really looking into it as an EU guidance. But now it does provide implications that by April 2021, you must have your product registered under the novel food guides, and it's quite a large application, and that all then must be all in and all certified as of April 2021. One of the main reasons why people have been a little bit skeptical with CBD, and again, this is from a YouGov survey, and it was just saying that people were kind of struggling a little bit with the regulations. So it does seem quite a woolly area. But if you're looking on the Home Office, they do give you some quite good guidelines that are quite straightforward. Within the UK, there's been various organisations which have tried to make it more transparent and also trying to kind of keep it all in line. So making sure that it is a credible organisation to go forward. I won't list each one of these individually, but things that you really need to be aware of, that if you are using a product or if you're buying wholesale CBD, it must come from a wholesaler that has a certified laboratory report. So you must know what you're getting. Anything that looks slightly dubious, it's your responsibility to either obviously not purchase it, but also to report it and to keep the industry credible. You also must hold your public liability insurance to make sure that the products are also covered under that. And you shouldn't be selling anything that's counterfeit or anything under the age of 18. So a lot of websites you might go onto now, if you're wanting to look into CBD, you're having to click and certify that you are over 18. So within the CBD world, there are kind of 10 main areas of acreage, and the UK is number 9. So actually, we're doing pretty well for such a small country. We've got about 9,000 acres of hemp that we're growing at the minute. Obviously, not all of that's going into CBD. And again, the US really is the largest player here. But it is the buyer's individual responsibility to make sure that it's certified, it's 100% natural, organic, gluten-free. The extraction can be solvent or it can be a CO2 extraction. But you've got to make sure again that it's using a tried and tested method. And there's various different lists just here of different areas or ones that you can get from which do have a certified CBD certificates that you can get from. There are others, so I'm not just saying that these are the only ones. And also there are 3 main products which do white label. So if you're looking to kind of get into it but not wanting to necessarily make your own product, there are places out there that will put it for you. Most of them are US and Mile High Labs, and they're hemp, they're US organisations, but Canna Creations is a UK based. So considerations is that CBD is still in the infancy, it's still being looked into. It's been quite a learning curve for formulators. So if you were looking to put it in, for example, water, or if you were to put it into a dairy product, every formulation will need to be different. It's a hydrophobic compound, it's oil at the end of the day, so it's not going to dissolve into water. So a lot of the times you're finding it into, let's say, bottles with water, and it's just going to stick to the sides unless you're using an encapsulated process or unless you're using a water-soluble infusion. So you really do need to talk to the formulators and make sure that it is suitable for what you want to pop it into. And this might explain why it's really the most popular that you're seeing it in an oil base still. So it's kind of just in its pure oil base, and then people are using it as a dropper. So you don't need to worry about the formulation itself. But many, many more products are coming onto the market. You've also got the consideration of 3 main types. You've got full spectrum, broad spectrum, and isolate CBD. So again, depending on which one that you go for, you've either got high concentrations of the CBD, you've also then got its whole cannabinoid profile, and you've also then got the terpenes that it might have with it. So again, all depending on what you're looking for, and there's experts in this field that can really help you choose to what you want. Also, the colour concentration does change. So if you're looking, for example, for a water, you've got to make sure that it doesn't taint or change the taste profile. There's quite a few considerations to have. There have been a lot of research and also a lot of media attention to various cases where the THC has been contaminated. So anything must be under 0.2 of THC. So that's the psychotropic compounds that we don't want. So that's completely legal. So anything above the 0.2 and above, it isn't allowed to be sold. So with that, there's been a lot of laboratory testing, and from here you can see that 38% were within the CBD content, which they said. But that's not too bad. 10% out, give or take, and you will see that there's degradation when it's been on the shelves under heat or under light for quite a while. You've also found that 38% had less than what they were saying. So again, that's a huge difference. So at best, you're having less, but also on the flip side, about 50% had measurable THC levels. So that again, psychotropic compound that we don't want. It is illegal to have it in there. And there's a few other cannabinoids which are deemed as not being illegal to have in there as well, but is the THC the main one. So just to kind of an overview, and we will share these slides, so you don't need to worry too much about reading all the bits and pieces. But here we have the CBD isolate, the broad spectrum and the full spectrum. So really what the difference is, and if you're thinking about popping it into a product, is kind of what to consider. Do you want it to be a pure CBD product? Do you mind if it has the full spectrum? And there's pros and cons there for both. As with anything that's plant derived, if you can have it within the full spectrum, you will also then have the other phytonutrients that enable it to be uptaken a little better in the body. But again, you will have then a lower CBD content. So it's kind of working out what you're wanting in a product and what you want to kind of put on the label, not necessarily what you can claim, but what kind of what you're looking for it to suit you and your products or brand's ethos. What's quite interesting as well is extracting CBD is very similar to extracting any other oil that you might do, say for example out of mint oil or herbal extracts. And that's becoming really popular, is actually having CBD, but also having it with something else that other people can really associate health to. Again, CBD seems to be one of those things that people know that it might be good for them, or they think that it might be good for them, but they don't really know why. They can't really put a finger on it. So if you're adding it, for example, with cinnamon oil or with mint, then you can begin to say actually that they have got other properties, or at least they've got other tastes that people really kind of resonate as something that they find appealing. So again, one for the formulators really kind of making sure that they're putting these blends together. So this is a really interesting one. So again, this is a US company that have made this one called Life Aid. And it's a really useful, functional product. So here, OJ Energetics, they've got, they're claiming to have the first patent protected water-soluble CBD. But also what you can see on here is that they've got the amount that they've got in it. They've also got adaptogens. They're also adding in rosemary, lemon balm, and they're claiming it's THC. So it's quite a nice label, nice and simple. But if people didn't know what CBD were, or if they were kind of just entering into that kind of space as consumerism, I think actually it's something I want to go down. There's quite a few appealing things that are on there. And at the end of the day, it seems that the consumer is still very much looking out for something that has a certain amount of calories. So again, that still resonates, that no fat, again, I say on this product, but it's something that people can associate with and think, actually, that's going to be pretty good for me, or it might be doing me some good. On Black Friday alone, this company sold £200,000, so very, very popular. So when we're looking at product popularity, and going back to just highlighting that the oil is hydrophobic, so it will need to have formulation considerations when it's going into it, to water or water-based product. But it really seems that oil is the most well used, or the most popular people are buying. And I guess because it's just something that they can work out that is what it is. You know, that they're not adding other bits and pieces to it. But it does seem that drinks are one of the growing sectors. And if we're looking at particularly kind of 2020, the beginning now, there seems to be more product launches of CBD water or drinks containing hemp that are becoming really, really popular. Also things like gummies, so that's a great way of keeping the CBD contained, is another way that is looking forward. Again, beauty products are not within the food and drink realm, but they seem to be very, very popular as well. So here we have some really interesting insights that we used to with Ipsos Mori. So this was commissioned for Nutri Wales, and it was looking at the Welsh populations and the UK populations. So here it was looked at was whether an infused chocolate was something that was deemed as would the consumers want it. If you were saying it had like nutritional value, very appealing, and also then all the health or the associated health kind of associations that it has within the human body. So would it relieve headaches? Would it relieve anxiety? And there's also wealth of knowledge of looking into it within epilepsy. So when they looked at it, they asked the consumers if this was something that they would think is appealing, is it something that they thought was going to be useful, and it came up particularly strong. So you can see here that the people that were surveyed very much liked the fact that it was going to be within chocolate, and it was just seen as something that they could use quite readily, help to relieve headaches, anxiety, inflammation. They did find it quite difficult to believe the health benefits, as much as that was something they all did want to believe as well. And when you look at the score, so anything above 100 was viewed as being something that the consumer would really want, and this scored 127. So it was really, really something that was a likelihood that people were going to try. And this was particularly in Wales, so it's quite an interesting one to be looking at. When you can compare that against the CBD infused yogurt, again, the top one is looking at the Wales, and then the bottom one is looking at the UK population, is that again, not so keen on kind of the oil infused yogurt. The UK as a whole was slightly higher, but when you're looking at the chocolate, it really was something that the Welsh population particularly was looking at, but also what the UK as a whole did think was very popular. And you do see quite a lot of chocolates, and it makes sense. You know, chocolate has a good lipid profile within it, so it could then hold the CBD quite well, and so it was attached to the lipids. Also, we're looking with the yogurts. So here we've got Froyo, which has come out with a hemp infused yogurt. It is green because of the matcha, not so much because of the hemp. But again, it's quite a really interesting use of the ingredients. And so here we can say that so this is what the female that was interviewed thought so on it, and they're saying that the evidence is really what's kind of important, and making it think that there have been no proper scientific studies done, which can be kind of quite tricky to believe whether CBD is something that you're looking for as a benefit or not. So considerations when you're creating a CBD product, as you can see, the graph here is absolutely, grown hugely, the amount of CBD products that are being launched. And also, as you can see earlier, that the demand for CBD products, or the interest, is certainly growing as well. So you must ensure that whatever you're sourcing has a lab certificate to prove that the THC levels are below 0.2%. So that's absolutely fundamental. If you can't get that, then your product will be illegal. It must come from one of the 10, soon to be 9 approved hemp strains. You need to consider whether you want an isolate, a broad spectrum, or a full spectrum CBD oil. And again, the implications that would have on your product, whether it's going to taste particularly strong, whether you're wanting to then also, you combine it, but often it's combined with coconut oil, for example, to kind of give it a slightly more subtle flavour. And again, it's a bit more palatable. You need to make sure that if you are putting together a product, that needs to be submitted to the novel food application by April 2021. You'll then need to have your own product tested. So you need to then ensure that you can demonstrate that X amount of your serving of your product has X amount of CBD oil within it. When you're labelling, you must ensure that it also complies to all normal food regulations. They must have in the nutritional value, etc., the source, the people that are producing it, but also making sure that it has CBD level on it there too. You cannot claim any medicinal properties. So again, you can't claim that it's going to cure X, Y, and Z. But again, there's already that association that you can put upon. Think to yourself, does CBD fit your product? And if you're looking to say, for example, to have a water, or if it's to be in a water-based solution, then it will need an encapsulation or a carrier. What's quite interesting, or you're seeing a little bit different on here, are some people are actually moving slightly away from the CBD, but using hemp oil itself. So hemp oil from the seeds, again, doesn't have the CBD in it, but you also have that association of hemp, of cannabis. And so again, slightly different ways that you can kind of get around that and still appeal to a market. So Future Foods, which we do various different projects in collaboration with academic and business, and we're just looking at different areas that could be looked at. So metabolomics could trace how much CBD is within the product, for example. You could then give it to subjects, they would take urine samples, and then you'd see if there was any particular difference between the pre and post. We could also do the similar thing with food processing. So for example, if you were to making a food that was going to be heat treated, you could see whether the chemical stability is still there, or even if the chemical is still there after the heat process. So again, there's lots of different areas that could be looked down, and it seems to be that there needs to be more research into this area. Research is particularly flaky, or it seems to be on animal trials, or it's in vitro, and we're really needing some more credible studies to put on. The opportunities into the market. We're seeing that good hemp, so you might have seen these on a lot of shelves, and they're the first to bring out CBD seed milk. So again, plant-based milks have been absolutely awash, and they've been really, really successful over the past few years. So again, adding this now into a CBD is a really first and a new to market, so quite an exciting thing for good hemp. Lots of kind of chocolates coming onto the market. Again, it's a food that we really like, as you can see earlier from the work that Louise did with Ipsos Mori. You can see that chocolate CBD was something that people really attributed to. Everyone likes chocolate, so again, if it's going to give you a little extra benefit, then that's going to be a great thing. So again, as I've touched on slightly away from the CBD, but if you were looking to have a hemp association, and again, I'm saying that hemp oil is very, very high in omega-3 fatty acids, something that the general population is quite deficient in, you could use an infusion of hemp or an infusion of hemp seed oil rather than CBD itself. So again, just a slightly different route. And for example, Recess, this is the very pastel colour cans of drink that are in the middle of the screen, they use hemp extract rather than CBD. They're kind of linking onto the market without kind of going down that route. There's a big opportunity with snacking, and snacking seems to be one of the biggest growing markets at the moment. So again, you could team it up with other functional ingredients such as, say, higher protein or antioxidants, anti-inflammatory, so something that you could fuse together. Dairy seems to be a great carrier for CBD, and actually seeing that Ben & Jerry's have launched that they're going to start producing an ice cream. It's not on the market yet, but again, anticipating for that one. As dairy obviously has a fat content, it can then bind to those micelles of fat lipids, so that'd be quite an interesting way of taking it up. You could add it within cupboard favourites. Again, we're seeing kind of hemp flour. Again, the baking craze is still kind of going. People are loving doing home baking, and people now are looking kind of for new initiatives or kind of new ideas to play with in the kitchen. So again, hemp flour is particularly popular, but again, ideas kind of adding in CBD could be something that works well. Aside to CBD, you could add in adaptogens, so things like cinnamon or ashwagandha, which is particularly popular at the moment, you could add that with botanicals. So again, you're just kind of grouping together anything that might have benefits, and also the things that complement each other, but you wouldn't want to do it willy-nilly, so you're making sure that these things do complement. Consumers are showing, especially within the Generation X, they're really looking for new experiences. So CBD, again, is really exciting. It's something that people kind of feel perhaps they've been stood away from for so many years. They're now allowed to have it, but you do need to make sure that you've got those repeat purchases. So you want to make it a positive experience, something that people can try, talk about, and then share again. The health and well-being is going to continue to be a major trend. And this is something that we know during or pre-COVID was huge, and it's really showing now to pick up. Again, looking at OJ Energetics, they're saying actually that their one product went up by 20% during the beginning of COVID. So again, people were beginning to kind of assume that it might have some health properties that they could put onto. As a negative, or not so much a negative, but as kind of a sort of perhaps doesn't sell it that well, is it always seen as a male-dominated product. So we'll begin to see that quite a lot of the products now are having pastel colours, or they're beginning to look a little bit more feminine or a little bit more female-friendly, just to appeal to a broader market. So just making sure when you are creating a product, that you're appealing to as many people as possible. People do see it as something that's quite fun, something that's a little bit novel, but also there are people a bit sceptical and think it's just like the other gimmick. So again, I think there is more studies that are needed, and hence this is where Future Foods can come in and really help give credibility to the product that you may want to formulate or that you have already formulated. And that's really the thing that's going to stand apart between the future, kind of making sure that you have those things that you can attribute it to. So just in a brief summary, so the CBD is a huge industry. It's certainly not going anywhere. It's very much here to stay. There are regulations which do make it quite challenging, and there is the Novel Food Act applications which do make it, again, quite a poignant thing that needs to be done quite quickly now. There really needs to be a more secure and regulated CBD oil supply chain. So again, just that people can trust it. Again, going back to the test results a little bit earlier, it did make people think, actually, what are they buying? If they're going to be spending quite a lot of money or money on this product, then is it going to be worth having that extra putting in towards it? And that brings us to a close. So I'll hand you back over to Rod for our whistle-stop tour. You're on mute, Rod.
Really helps to mute off, doesn't it? I was going to say thank you very much for that whistle-stop tour and exploration. I really appreciated that. I would like to say that I've actually invited Mark Tucker to join the panel. We, as you can see, have been exploring this area from a sort of Nutri-Wales Future Foods point of view, but it's new to us. Mark, I could see, was giving some really good background, is living and breathing this area, and giving some really useful insights in the feed panel. So I just thought it'd be very useful for him to say hello and share that with the rest of the group. So hello, Mark. Thank you for joining us. Oh, and you're on mute too.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. Sorry for the late arrival, but you'll probably discover that I don't keep quiet. So that's hence the chat. But I'm happy to contribute and answer any questions anyone's got.
Okay. Well, first off, Mark, could you just introduce yourself to the rest of the people on the call, so that just know where you're.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the thread.
I'm Mark Tucker. I'm CEO of a company called TTS Pharma. We've been working with Aberystwyth with the last 2.5, almost 3 years. We've got a number of projects which range from phenomics and agronomics, cultivation, all the way through to fractionation of the plant into its individual molecules and components. We've run process engineering evaluations, so looking at CO2 and ethanol and butane comparisons to optimize the actual extraction and production process. And we have got a number of projects running with the animal science team as well. So we've got 5 species actually under evaluation at the moment for various clinical effects using the formulations that have been developed both at our production facility on the continent as well as the R&D facility in Aberystwyth. All of this work's been undertaken underneath Home Office licenses, which include both the high THC indoors indica growing, as well as the low THC hemp growing thing. And what you see behind me is our farmer in Yorkshire. So, and hopefully the seeds are growing nice and healthily just around in the corner in Gogoran. So we should see something of similar height fairly shortly.
Right. Okay. Well, that's really interesting and something I was not aware of. So really, really useful.
Well, we've been keeping it very, very quiet because most people, and certainly all the big American and North and Canadian companies, the first thing they do is knock on Oxford or Cambridge or Imperial's door. But you know, that's not ideal for smaller companies, and it's not ideal for entrepreneurs. And at the end of the day, you just get lost in the noise of unfortunately, very poor management and decision making. So, you know, there are a number of UK companies who are doing good work quietly and getting on with it. Whereas I think what you'll find is most of the North American groups are struggling to justify their existence at the moment.
Okay. Really interesting. Yeah, as I was saying, this is a sort of area from NutriWales Future Foods. We cover multiple topics and areas, and something we've sort of looking at and investigating. But you know, your comments and insights on living and breathing it at the moment will be much appreciated. What I'll do is I'll turn to the chat function, just see what questions we've got, and I'll just pass it to everyone here. So just scroll back. Okay, so the first question I've got, this is just in the order they've sort of come in. So this was from Tim Williams at ABBA. He's interested in our views about areas for exploratory science, which will feed the CBD products market of the future. What areas do we see that the science should explore? And obvious for you, Mark, there may be things which are commercially sensitive, but it'd be interesting to get broad views of what areas.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, absolutely. We've been working with the animal science team on a variety of anti-inflammatory indications. We've also got anti-anxiolytic, so that's, you know, anxiety and depression. There are 3 or 4 other models which we're running at the moment that haven't started at other university sites, which include immune modulation, oncology, pain relief. Those are the sort of top 5 that we have that we're looking at. The interesting bit is that there's an awful lot of research that's been undertaken over the years, particularly by the NIH in the States, but it's all preclinical. So it's on mice and rats and other rodents. And the transition between the, excuse the background noise, someone's making coffee. Transition between that kind of data and putting it into humans or animals, large animals in the in vivo studies isn't necessarily logical, and it doesn't always work. So you've got to go through the steps and stages to be able, so you can make a medical claim or you can show evidence that you have cause and effect. Showing cause and effect, which is what a regulator is looking for, is something which is very difficult to do with a complex compound. So it's a bit like with Chinese medicine. If you're working, some of the Chinese medicine solutions work really well, but you don't know which bit or part of the compound is the active ingredient or whether they're working in sync together. So hence the fractionation project, because we're breaking everything apart and we're looking at everything on an individual molecule basis, and then we can recombine to say, well, what happens if you add CBG to CBC? What happens if you add CBN? And if you know the building blocks, you can then recombine everything and go back the other direction. So I have some personal opinions as to whether entourage is, it's very difficult to get something which claims entourage through a regulator. Let me put it like that. I'm going to be as nice as I politely can be. There are reasons why people talk about it as an entourage effect. And in reality, to have a clinical product or something that's going to be useful to a patient, you have to be able to demonstrate that cause and effect.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks, Mark. And To the rest of the panel, is there any other sort of areas that we're thinking research could take place around this area?
Yeah, I think there's additional steps as well in the future. I mean, obviously we focus very much on food application, and I think it's around processing and what is actually going to be stable, and also, what's going to be retained in the body. Is it going to be useful in particular formats from a food applications point of view? I think there's a lot of work to be done around that, just in terms of proving it's worth having it in the product in the first place as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think if I can just say, I think you're absolutely right, Louise. What the issue here is that actually you need to demonstrate where it stops being a food and where it starts being a medicine, and no one's done that work. So if you've got a scale from 0 to 100, you need to demonstrate the effect somewhere on that scale. Now, we've got studies and trials that are running at the moment where we're seeing people who have managed to remove their entire opiate medication under prescription, and yet the study is being done under medical supervision. So, I would never ever recommend that anyone does that without having some kind of direct involvement with their professional healthcare. But the point is at one end, if you're taking high enough doses, you can have a clear clinical effect if you treat someone with a high concentration. But if you drip feed someone over with high frequency but much lower doses over time, so it's more preventative, we don't understand how that works and how it translates into bodily function yet. And there's that whole sort of raft of work has to be undertaken before you understand the safety and the toxicology and the efficacy of those products.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Thanks, guys. I'm just keeping an eye on the chat at the moment. Well, one bit I'd be interested from what you added earlier on was around the levels, the 0.2% threshold.
Yeah, 0.2% applies only to the biomass. So it's covered by the Agricultural Act. So you can only grow hemp which contains less than 0.2% THC. That is the rule to define an EU cultivar. It has zero bearing on the finished product. So a finished product must be compliant with the Home Office requirements, as well as novel food, as well as other regulations, general food law and labeling, etc. So in practice, what that means is you can't have more than 1 milligram of any of the 4 analytes. So you add the 4 analytes together. It's not one analyte or another. So in actual fact, it's no more than 0.25 milligrams of each analyte. But of course, they come in different ratios. They're not static. So it's 1 milligram is the combined amount. Now, in order to test for that accurately in a 10 milliliter bottle, which is the average bottle sold in UK, you have to test on to ppm, so parts per million. It is impossible to achieve that level of accuracy on an HPLC, which only goes to 2 decimal places. So you have to go to 5 decimal places to get that accuracy. Right. Now, there are many, many labs who fail to do that. And I'll leave it there. There's actually only 2 labs in UK that anyone from a governmental perspective will believe. One is LGC, the old laboratory government chemist, and the second one is Ferroscience. And if you don't have data or a COA that has been confirmed on their paperwork, then you won't get through the process.
That's interesting, because that was where our thinking was going. Because if you think a lot of our audience could be people who are looking for a good supply to understand where they're getting their product from, it's getting one sense making sure you've got the right supply with the right paperwork, and that's down to what labs you're using.
A lot of it does, yeah. And at the end of the day, there are new international standards that have now been agreed between the various international authorities. It's not public knowledge yet, but they're likely to be, I believe it's going to be revealed in the autumn. So, and those minimum standards are ppm. So, people are going to have to invest an awful lot more in their analytical methods and the equipment they use and the protocols and SOPs in order to do that. And one of the big problems, of course, is that, you know, when you're sourcing product from North America, CBN, for example, is not an illegal component in, it's not a controlled drug. It's not deemed or classified as a controlled drug in North America. So any product coming in from North America, any of the lab data, firstly needs to be repeated in UK to validate it. But secondly, generally speaking, they don't test for CBN, or CBN is in the non-controlled element. So you'll look at it and you say, yes, it's THC free, but in actual fact, it's saturated with CBN. Now, a product, and that's also an indicator of an old product, because typically THC is found in freshly processed biomass. But if you leave it on the shelf for a year or so, it'll all convert to CBN. So if you've got something that's high in CBN and low in THC, it's probably cold hold stock, but it's also illegal.
So what would I be right saying that actually the time factor is a key component? You could have something, purchase it, and you're okay, and then
possibly, yes. Yeah, and that's one of the requirements of the novel food dossier, is to show over time that your product is stable and that nothing is converting between the different molecules. So the molecules are all very flexible. They do sort of convert from one form to another under certain conditions and circumstances. So in order to have a stable finished product that's suitable for bulk, as a bulk ingredient into the main supply chain, you know, the more components you have, if you have a broad or full spectrum product, you're more likely or more at risk of having an unstable product. And certainly a lot of the products that were launched a year ago, 2 years ago into the market, they seldom had anything more than a 30-day shelf life. You know, and that's because the products deteriorated very quickly. And so, you know, the full spectrum products are not stable. And that's not suitable for a novel food.
No, and then going on to the sort of novel foods and the time scales we've got at the moment, and what you're saying also is there's a legislation and testing might change over that time. Natalie was pointing out the deadline coming up next year.
Correct.
Correct for that?
Yeah, it's virtually impossible to get a validated application on your first submission. So because it's the way it's structured, you have things you need to do which require feedback from the authorities. And in order to get feedback, you have to submit your dossier. So it's very, very difficult to get a fully validated dossier. So I'd recommend you don't leave it till March the 30th to put your dossier in, because they're not going to flip a switch. We were number, I think, 20 or 21 in the queue, and we were the first UK company. So all of the other 18, 19 were European firms. And since then, there are over 350 applicants. So the whole system is cluttered at the moment with applications which they don't have time to review. So in practice, unless you are in by September, you won't get reviewed. You will not have a valid application. Yeah. So you really need to find someone who is aligned, or aligned with an application that's already gone in. That's your highest or lowest risk of being removed.
Good opportunity. Yeah, good way to. Yeah. Good strategy. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's going to be no time left to get these things through. And for example, we got our feedback from the FSA after 4 months. We got our feedback from the European FSA after 6 months. So, and that's with 21 in the process. Now there's 350.
Yeah. What's the implication of the timescales? Interesting. The other one, if you're happy to share this and agree with it, so indication for people, obviously that there's man-hour efforts in that. It's just, what are the sort of cost implications going for sort of novel foods?
They're not cheap. In reality, it's the production side of the business which needs to make the application. It's not for the brand to do it. The supply chain is absolutely crucial to having a successful novel food applicant or dossier approved. So the brands don't know these things and they don't control them. And so when you have a consumer product, it's really important to make sure that you're aligned with a group that is going to satisfy all of those requirements. And it's very, very difficult for some of the applicants, I think, to be approved because of where their product comes from. If it's not from an EU cultivar, highly unlikely to get approved. If it's grown in certain areas of the world where there are high levels of contamination, background contamination, heavy metals or hydrocarbons, benzopyrenes, etc., you have an extra thing to prove. You've got to prove that these are absent from your process before you can go to the next stage. So it's important for a brand or a product to know their supply chain and to ask the right questions, but I would not suggest it's important for them to make the application.
No. Okay. Make sure you've got a...
Yeah, and it costs hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds,
But,
and secondary costs, and that's per SKU. So, you know, whether you've got a liquid or a powder isolate or a water soluble version, they are all separate novel food applications. And you know, for example, in the water soluble side, there are over 170 patents in water soluble technology, and none of the products on the market have licensed that. So the question is, at what time, you know, how long, what is the lifespan of some of these products? Because if you haven't licensed the IP and the technology from the owner of that IP, you are at risk of being closed down. And it is the owner of that IP who would be responsible for making that novel food application. So we're not doing a water soluble version until we have licensed that technology, but we do have a liquid version, bulk concentrate and finished product. And we've also got a dry powder isolate version, both of which are capable of being ingredients in finished products.
Thanks. I think the bit I also caught in that was making sure if you're know what the right questions to ask are.
Yeah.
You know, it's a challenging area.
It's a very, very complex area, and it's evolving because it's such a young area as well. That's the other problem. You know, novel foods is not a well-trod path in terms of European regulatory law, and you know, I don't think it's going to change. It will remain a novel food, but you know, finding skills and resources within the regulatory environment, you know, to review the products, to understand the products, to make assessments of safety and stability, etc., is not easy because it's relatively speaking a small part of the regulatory world, and you know, it's difficult for companies as well because there are equally not as many people providing contract services into that space. So there's not a lot of doors you can knock on. So it's a bit of sort of, there's a lot of Q&A, and it's really essential to have a really good relationship with the regulators because, you know, we're on the phone or emails with them, you know, every month, several times. And, you know, you have to work within the rules and respect the rules, whether you like them or not. That's the problem. And, you know, the path to success is choosing the one with the least resistance. And that's always going to be within the rules rather than trying to change the rules.
Yeah. But I can just imagine what the world is like trying to get through. I know from Natalie's exploring this topic how challenging it is to really get an insight. So I really appreciate your sharing your knowledge with us.
No, you're not. I'm sorry. I seem to have taken over, and that's not my intention.
No.
I talk too much, but sorry, Natalie and Louise, and all the listeners.
Yeah, I'm going to just keep an eye on the questions here to make sure I get to everyone's points. There was a question from Mark about the other 3 analytes. I think that was actually answered on the line by you there, Mark. Okay, the other 4 plus there.
Yeah, it's THC, THCA, THCV, and CBN are the 4 analytes, plus their respective isomers. So altogether, it's 16 separate components that are tested for.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, it's in there. Great, thanks.
And anyone who wants to have their supply chain checked, I would recommend Ferroscience. They are the only group in UK at the moment who have a validated, accredited method.
I think that's what, you know, if you're thinking of people who are putting this into food products, where are they going to go, where are they going to get it? That actually puts a question again to the group. For me, we've been discussing it. Do we have sight of how CBD gets affected by heat or freezing? if you're thinking of that, in a process for creating food products, what do we have it insight of how that affects the integrity of the CBD oils?
Heat definitely does. You're effectively, it's called decarboxylation. When you have the alkaline form of the molecule, i.e. CBD, the acid form of the molecule, CBDA, which is the acid form. When you heat it, it will convert to the alkaline form, i.e. CBD. So same with THCA, converts to THC. So the heating process is used as in some production environments as a method of converting the acid form into the alkaline form.
Okay.
And in terms of freezing, that's part of the stability work. It's a lot more stable at lower temperatures, which is often typically the case. And if you've got isolates, they're already purified molecules. They've been crystallized. That's in their crystalline form. So also they're a lot more stable too.
So yeah, because this question came in about when we were talking about sort of shelf life, if you like.
Yeah.
Would it be frozen? What would be the impact?
Yeah, no, I noticed, and there's a question here which kind of relates to it, which is about the THC, CBD transforming to small amounts of THC. That was a single study that was undertaken by a government body many, many years ago. It has never been repeated in practice in humans. So under strict conditions in a laboratory environment where you have a very high acid environment, you can see CBD converting itself into a different molecule. However, it's, to the best of my knowledge, not been repeated in practice in humans, and we have not seen it in any of our stability studies undertaken thus far. So, it's it's noise, background noise, but it's a question that has to be answered from a regulatory perspective.
Okay, great, thanks. Just looking here, I've got one from Tim. If I've missed any, please, my apologies. But are there any showstoppers like WHO's suggestion that CBD is transformed into small amounts of THC in the human gut?
Yeah, that was the question I just answered.
Yeah, sorry.
Converting it into...
Andy's clarified it. Great, thanks, sorry. Okay. If I bought water-soluble CBD and added it to beer, what do I need to do to get it passed?
There are a number of people who have done that, and it tastes quite good, I might add. I would recommend the big problem here from a local perspective, an entrepreneurial perspective. I don't want to condone it, but you could probably do it for as long as you wanted, reasonably speaking. But ultimately, one would need to tie in with a novel food application that is going through with a water-soluble component. And like I say, the difficulty we've had is finding a suitable partner to license that IP from. So, for example, if it was Constellation or Diageo or Ab InBev, one of the big guys, they would not get into the space unless they owned or had licensed the IP to enable them to put it into a beer, because otherwise they'd be in deep water or deep beer. So the issue is really the IP behind it. And there is technology. You can use emulsifying technology, nanotechnology, you can use co-crystallization. There's all sorts of different chemical ways of suspending what is effectively a fatty substance, an oil, inside of water. But for example, nanotechnology is banned currently in foods in the European Union. So you can't use nano at the moment, but there are other ways of doing it still. And it would have to go through that safety assessment and full process. So my recommendation is to find someone who has made a water-soluble submission. We will be, but we haven't done yet because we're still evaluating two different sets of IP that we think we can work with. And these are sort of commonly used techniques in pharmaceuticals and in nutraceuticals and even cosmetics. So it's not totally new. It's a well-established technique that is commonly used in other spheres, but the companies that own that IP haven't released it into this sector yet. So, but there are people who are providing ingredients that claim to have that capability, but to the best of my knowledge, none of them have licensed any of the IP. So they're doing it at risk to whoever buys it from them. And I should add, most of those companies are North American too. So, some of the biggest offenders of breaking the regulations, both European and UK, are North American suppliers. And it's and the problem that the market is facing at the moment is most of this product has been grown indoors, or it's genetically modified, or it's a hybrid. None of the plants and the biomass originate from EU cultivars, but because the US and Canadian markets are in a state of collapse, basically the demand has not kept up with the supply, the people who are still growing it are desperate to generate revenues, and basically they're dumping the product into Europe at prices which are below what it actually costs to manufacture. So the European suppliers who are compliant, many of whom which are compliant, are struggling to compete against the big players in America who literally just dumping the product. And until the enforcement happens and stops that process, unfortunately, there's an awful lot of extremely poor quality product and non-compliant product that's being imported through border control.
Which doesn't help the...
No, it doesn't help the genuine industry over here get established and put the regulations in place.
Yeah.
And it costs as well, because you have to sustain a business and employees during a period of time where people are just selling something at a quarter of what it costs to make.
Yeah. What the question which is on my lips as well is Brexit and the impact for British companies in this when it comes to being a supplier. How does that?
I think Britain's well placed. Strangely, I know it's complicated here, and I know people would like a more liberal environment, but we have spent decades creating regulations to protect consumers and patients from poor quality products like thalidomide and certain baby milk foods and stuff like that. So there are reasons why people have spent time devising regulations, and hemp is no different from any of those other product supply chains. And UK has led the way in many healthcare and medical standards and regulations over the decades. It's shown much of Europe and much of the world how to do things more efficiently or more effectively or more safely. In the same is true of some of the food and even some agricultural things. I'm sure many farmers might disagree with me, but there are reasons that these rules exist. And I think moving forward, if we can work within those rules, Britain will set a new standard for how the hemp industry can work, because the US and the Canadian models are flawed, completely flawed. They don't work in the way that they're structured at the moment. And the projections that have been touted around are based on a Canadian model predominantly, or a US model. And the regulations are very different over there. So you can't apply those projections to Europe or the rest of the world. So, and a lot of the reports that I've seen in regards to those projections are flawed in their logic and in their assumptions that they've made, because they have not taken into account those regulations. They've just assumed that they would be dropped or disappear. And that's not how the system works. So my view is that over the next 2 years, the UK is going to be in a very good position to have created a model which does create hemp being grown in UK, being processed in UK, and being converted into food products, nutraceuticals, cosmeceuticals, pharmaceuticals. And in that regulated environment, we will see enormous growth. And it will be a model for others to follow. And some of that comes back to standards and testing, and some of it comes back to the fact that we actually do quite a good job and we've been around and doing this for many, many years. Britain is Britain because of the hemp and flax industry. Our navy and our sailing and our some of our industrial heritage come back to having grown hemp for centuries. Yeah. And we need to get back to that position where we can convert it both into industrial use for textiles, biocomposites, and then use the leaf and the flower for the medical and the healthcare benefits. And it's there, it's possible. Yeah. It's just slow. It's very slow.
Fascinating. Thanks. Well, and it's been really interesting for you to join in this debate on something we were looking at as an area for research, and you've obviously given us a good case for why that's an area to be looking at. And
it is. I think there needs to be a lot more animal science support in terms of the data generated and veterinary work and human healthcare work. I think it's all linked, to be honest. Yeah. In pharmaceuticals, which is my background, to find a plant with so much potential, so many active ingredients, so many incredible benefits, health benefits, it's extremely rare, extremely rare. And we shouldn't lose this opportunity because it's a fascinating plant.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. I'm just going for last questions now. So if anyone's got anything else they'd like to post and ask, please do. Obviously, you can contact us after the webinar, and we can do any introductions and link ups if people are happy with that. That is part of our role through Future Foods and NutriWales. Tim's got a question there. Who is discussing pre-harvest research, breeding new strains and hybrids? I think there's a big potential here. Think skunk. So,
can I just say 2 minutes on that one as well?
Go on then.
We have actually just been awarded a very nice 7-figure grant by the Welsh Office to undertake work at Aberystwyth University on phenomics and genomics. So there is a program that is just starting in the Gorgodon campus, and it is evaluating different strains and modifying those particular seeds to bring them into the EU cultivar list. There are a couple of problems at the moment. The American and Canadian strains, many of which is GMO, and unfortunately, because of this 0.2, 0.3% issue, which is another reason why many of them don't comply, in order to be on the EU list, unless they change that threshold, we have a different set of seeds that we can work with in Europe compared to North America. And the seeds that have slightly more THC in them generate much higher levels of CBG or CBC or CBD. So there is an opportunity to create strips in fields, effectively, where one strip would be strong in CBD, another one would be strong in CBG, another one would be strong in CBC. So farmers would be able to grow cannabinoid-specific strains of seeds. That's where we're going to. But the other problem is that the currently situation is that with an ordinary plant that is on the EU list, you typically get around about 0.8 to 1% yield of CBD. And the issue is that if you leave the plant later in the season, and that plant is typically harvested in late July, August. So let's say in UK or France or Ireland, if you leave that to later in the season, so you get to about October, you get up to 4 or 5% yield in that plant. But many of the leaves drop off. So the CBD content is actually in the flower, and the flower you're not allowed to use, apart from pharmaceutical use. But for wellness products, you're not allowed to use it. So by that time, you've lost. And the other issue with it is that the industrial element of the plant, fiber that you get in the spore, which is really good and high yield in hemp, but very low yield in indica plants, becomes really fibrous. The lignin inside the plant is much, much tougher. So you get the later you leave it to get a higher yield in your pharmaceutical or your sort of phytoactives, you end up with an industrial plant that's pretty useless because the actual equipment that you need to process it, you can't. It's too tough because of the lignin. So in order for the machinery that is commonly used today, you need to harvest it in July, August, when it's still a young plant at its sort of optimum. But the problem is you don't get the maximum yield from all the other benefits, the other phytoactives. So what we're trying to do is to bring those two closer together. So in other words, we might delay the industrial phase, but bring the medical phase earlier. Because at the moment, the optimum harvest points are like this, and we need to bring them on top of each other. So again, that's one of these sort of the purposes of the grant money is for Aberystwyth to help us develop that process and the optimum growing cycles and things, because the biorefining facility there, the R&D facility on the campus is second to none, and it's got huge expertise in oats. Some of the most successful strains of oats for growing all around the world in sort of disease-resistant forms and water, reduced water zones and things like that. Aberystwyth has done fantastic work, so they're a really good place from an agricultural perspective. And to make that transition from agricultural R&D through to animal and through to human, I think is, Aber's got all the opportunities at its feet, because it's got fields and it's got mountains and it's got animals, and doing that work in Imperial or Oxford or Cambridge isn't possible.
Not so easy. No. Well, very good.
Anyway, sorry, I've
do for Aber as well, which we, through the Future Foods programs is part of the program. So that might be a good way in for some food and drink companies to start to engage in some of those.
Absolutely agree. I mean, Aberystwyth, I think, could become a real centre of excellence for this.
Yeah, excellent. Oh, well, thanks, Mark. I think that's a great way to sort of wrap up today's session.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and thank you, Natalie and Louise. And sorry to butt in.
No, it was great. Thank you so much.
For us, it was really good to have you join us to really show what it's like on the inside of this industry and set an area of work.
No, it's all right. My absolute pleasure, and you can blame Rian over the Aber Innovation Centre.
I'll thank her. I will thank her, not blame her. Okay. If that's it, we will be sending out a recording of this. I know there was huge amounts of info shared, so there's some bedtime viewing for you, and we will also be sending the slide pack out. We've put on our email address for contact, so if anyone wants to follow up on any areas of this, please drop us a line. But yeah, I'll say thanks again to all the panelists, and particularly thank you, Natalie and Mark, for joining us and making this a really good session. So appreciate it. Cheers.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.